All right. Well, I will go ahead and kick us off today. Thank you all so much for being with us on this webinar about promoting your most important city initiatives. My name is Annie Osborne, and I am a program director on the Strategic Partnerships team at the National League of Cities. We're really excited to be partnering with IndyGov on this event. IndyGov has been a really valued member of the NLC Strategic Partnerships program for a year or two now. And our partnerships program is a group of private sector companies, nonprofits, and associations that really invest in supporting local leadership through NLC. We know, as well as you do, that cities don't operate in a silo. They engage with partners in almost every aspect of their work. And we like to bring together partners such as IndyGov to help cities solve the challenges that they deal with on a daily basis and implement solutions. So just a little bit about IndyGov before we get started. They are a constituent relationship management tool that serves members of Congress, governors, state legislatures, and city and county officials. Together, they serve more than 200 million constituents across 42 states. The problem that they're really focused on solving is constituent communication. They help local government respond to constituent messages and reach out to their constituents proactively. They also help keep track of what your residents care about. So today they will be exploring how to communicate with residents about the city initiatives that your teams are working hard on every day. This webinar will be led by Liz Fisher, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at IndyGov, and she will moderate a conversation with former mayors Rick Kriseman of St. Petersburg, Florida, and Bob Buckhorn of Tampa, Florida. So thank you all again for being with us, and thank you to the IndyGov team and to our speakers today. Liz, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Annie. We are so honored to be here and to be hosted by NLC and joined by our audience of many city leaders across the country, and of course, especially Mayor Kriseman and Mayor Buckhorn. I have the pleasure of introducing the mayors who will be our subject matter experts on promoting your most important city initiatives. And I'm really excited about this topic and think that we have a lot of very actionable information that folks can build on and learn from. To speak about this from firsthand experience, we have Mayor Richard Kriseman, who was the mayor of St. Petersburg from 2014 to 2022. During that time, St. Pete's was ranked as Florida's best managed city. He has been recognized for his work in climate policy and small business advocacy, and prior to his mayoral term, served in the Florida House of Representatives, as well as on the St. Pete's City Council. In addition to that, we're joined by Mayor Bob Buckhorn, mayor of Tampa from 2011 to 2019. During that time, he reshaped how City Hall does business, and he did that in partnership with local businesses and community activists. In addition, he led the city out of a major recession. He managed to balance $1 billion budget year after year for 8 years, and during that time also made major infrastructure investments, some of which we're going to talk about today. Thank you, mayors, for being here.
Good to be with you, Liz.
Great. So in order to dive into our topic of promoting major city initiatives, we felt like it would be most helpful to focus on a couple of huge accomplishments in Tampa and St. Petersburg, which, by the way, are sister cities. So they are both public works projects, and Mayor Kriseman oversaw the redevelopment of the St. Pete's Pier. Mayor Buckhorn was responsible for the development of the Julian B. Lane Park. And I would love to just start by giving the audience some context around those projects. So let's start with you, Mayor Kriseman, and if you can tell us about the Pier project.
Happy to do so, Liz. And thank you to IndyGov for putting this on today, along with NLC. So the St. Pete Pier, St. Pete's always had a pier on our waterfront. Had one for over 100 years. And actually, when I was first on city council, we had done a study of the current iteration of the pier that we had to see what its condition was. Study came back that it was in poor condition, and the administration at that time started to make the decision that we would need to have a new pier, put some money in, identified some money for that to happen, and the process started. Now, I'm going back to mid 2000s at this point in time. Sometime around 2011 or 12 is when a design was selected, went through numerous meetings with the public to talk about what the public wanted to see, went through the process of selecting a design, and it was resoundingly hated by the community. So much so that a referendum was put on the ballot to end the contract with the contractor and the design team. Now, when that passed, the mayor at the time had already closed the pier, and so the pier was basically fenced off and was deserted. And this is on the most valuable piece of land in the entire city, on the waterfront, which is, when there are overhead shots of our city, that's what they typically were featuring. I then got elected and made the decision we had to start the process over. And I'm happy to go into details about what we did and how we did it. But this was, without question, the most significant project in the city, and probably in at least the last 50 years, the most impactful project the city had undertaken, and certainly based on its history, the most challenging that the city had ever undertaken, given the prior effort at building it and the way the public responded to that effort.
Great, thanks for that. And we definitely will dive in. It's a phenomenal project writ large, but especially knowing the huge obstacles that you had to overcome to essentially start it from the ground up again. And so before I dive into some of those obstacles and how you overcame them, I'd love to get some background on the Julian B. Lane Park from Mayor Buckhorn.
Sure, Liz. First of all, thank you for hosting this. Thanks to Indigo for allowing this to take place and allowing us to tell our story to our fellow city builders out there. It's really, although we can't see you, it's really nice to be amongst you. We are a special breed, and it's always good to be with fellow disciples of this. Just to give you some context, Tampa is the third largest city in the state of Florida, a top 50 market in terms of size, 8th largest media market in the country. Tampa is a waterfront city, but yet had turned its back on the waterfront for decades. We have a river that runs through the heart of our downtown. It was a river that was vastly underutilized. It was a city that was in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression, and a place where sidewalks rolled up at 4 o'clock, not even 5 o'clock. It was a place where there were 600 people that lived in downtown Tampa, and 400 of them lived in the Morgan Street jail. This was not a place that you now know to be one of the hottest real estate markets in America, and a place that has embraced the waterfront. So I was elected in 2011, not the best time to be a mayor, as those of you that were mayors at the time know. It was a very difficult time financially. But we set out to make sure that that waterfront was the center of everything that we did, as opposed to the far western edge. And there had been 5 previous mayors that had done certain segments of our Riverwalk. And I was able to come in and finish the last segment, which literally has transformed our city. And for those of you that have been to Tampa in the last 5 years, have seen the transformation of one of America's fastest growing cities. In conjunction with that, there was a dilapidated 30-acre park on the other side of the river that was dark, that was dangerous, that was poorly designed, and vastly underutilized. And so we set out to activate that. And that also was in a neighborhood that had been ill-served for decades. It was a neighborhood of color. It was a neighborhood that was historic in nature. Some of the original cigar rollers that settled Tampa lived in that neighborhood, but the city had not invested in that for probably 40 years. And so we set out to take that 35-acre park and transform it into what became our equivalent of Central Park in New York City. It was fraught with risk. It was fraught with racial politics. It was fraught with communication challenges. It was fraught with the ability to develop consensus about what that park should look like. It was an exercise in community building and community empowering, which meant that we had to reach out and touch all of the segments of the community that historically had used that park, that had grown up with that park, that appreciated that park or not, and how it was going to affect the neighborhood. And bear in mind, again, this was a neighborhood that had been severely underappreciated for decades. And so we set out to do that, and we're going to talk a little bit later on about the communications challenges and how we did that. I can tell you this right now, and I think Mayor Kriseman would say the same thing. I wish I had IndyGov when I went through that process, because it would have made our lives collectively a lot easier and made that communication process more seamless and more encompassing, and really touched everybody that should have a voice in the development of a park of that magnitude. So Liz, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks. We really appreciate that. These are, like I said, these are tremendous projects, tremendous accomplishments. They both reoriented the cities, which is pretty remarkable, and took advantage of these incredible natural resources that, you know, I mean, in both of these cases, in Tampa, you said the city was previously not oriented toward the river. In St. Pete's, Mayor Kriseman, you talked about that, you know, again, like incredible real estate being fenced off for years. So I'm sure that there's any number of angles that we could explore for these projects, but given our focus today, we'll talk about the community engagement, we'll talk about the communications around them. And to start that, I'd love to hear about who you considered to be the stakeholders in these projects, the extent to which the community was involved, engaged, and essentially how you thought about those constituencies.
So interesting. Well, sorry. So, you know, the pier is in downtown St. Pete's, right in the heart of our downtown area. And so, you know, the natural thinking would be those who are most concerned are the ones who are in the heart of downtown. But when we started this process over again, there were a couple of things that were on our mind. Number one was the old iteration of the pier. And for anybody who may have ever watched the Grand Prix, which is an IndyCar race that takes place in downtown St. Pete, they always had the overhead visuals, and you may remember the inverted pyramid, which was our old pier. It was a very iconic structure. That was part of the problem in the first go around, is they decided they wanted to do something that was iconic, but it didn't function at all. And so we knew that when we started this over, we needed to do some things different. First off, the old pier, no one went there. The only time residents in the city of St. Petersburg would go to the old pier, other than when it was going to close and everybody wanted to go then, is if somebody was visiting from out of town. If they were visiting, you took them there. Otherwise, as a resident, you never went because there was no reason, there was no draw to go there. So our hope is we wanted to create a pier district and a structure that would be welcoming to the entire community, not just those who live in downtown and not just those who have people that come to town to visit, but whether you lived on the west side of town or the south side of town or north or downtown, anywhere in the city, we wanted to try and create something that was going to be welcoming to everyone throughout the city. And in order to do that, you needed to get the input from everyone throughout the entire city, not just in your downtown area. And so we held, I want to say, between 30 to 50 meetings with the community. We met with special interest groups, whether it was the Council of Neighborhood Associations, individual neighborhood associations, the Urban League, just a myriad of different community organizations. We met with the business community, from the downtown partnership to the chamber, and individual businesses, both large and small. We wanted to try and make sure that we heard as many voices as possible to try and avoid, quite frankly, the mistakes that happened in the first go round. Because the last thing I wanted to have as a part of my legacy is he started it and he failed too. And I know that's one of the things that Bob, I'm sure, is going to talk about, and that he should be, and I know he is proud of, is that, as he mentioned before, a number of mayors started it, but nobody ever finished it until Bob Buckhorn. And I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to make sure that I didn't start a project that didn't get finished. So it was really critical that we heard as many voices as is possible and used as many outreach tools as we could that we had available. Again, I too wish we had IndyGov available at the time. We didn't. So from door to door to sending out text messages to emails to surveys to having the stations run PSAs about neighborhood meetings and gatherings where people could come and share what their thoughts were, what they'd like to see at the pier. And it was really a fascinating process, because ultimately, I think the reason we have the success, and we've had the success with the pier that we did, is what became very clear to my administration was what it looked like was important, but it wasn't the most important thing. What was more important was, what is it going to do? What's your experience going to be when you go there? It had to be more than, hey, that's a cool looking building. All right, I've seen it, I'm done. If you're going to get your residents to come back, it had to be about what it did. And so that's the second reason that hearing from the public was so important, is we needed to hear not just what they wanted it to be. Did they want it to look good or be good, but what did they want to see out there? And go ahead.
For those who might not be familiar with the pier or haven't visited, what is the experience of the pier today? Like, what are some of the things that people go there to do? What sort of businesses are, impacted by it?
So the original pier, the old pier, and the history of all the piers basically was a long road that led to a building that was over water. And before you got to the road, there were parking lots on both sides. And so it was a lot of asphalt, a lot of concrete. And then this very strange looking building was out on the end. That was an inverted pyramid. There were some restaurants there and some very tchotchke kind of shops that were really aimed at tourists. And that was it. And so what we wanted to create was something, and what people wanted was a family-friendly experience. Something that, whether you were into the environment, there was something there for you. If you wanted to do some shopping, there was something there. If you wanted to go eat, there was something there. If you just wanted to hang out, there was a place to do that. And our city is known for arts and culture. And so making sure that we had public art at the pier was also important. And so we call it a whole experience, PIER experience. It's a little kitschy, but it worked.
It took me a second. It took me longer than it should have.
But there's an open air market. There is a playground that's unlike anything else in this area. We spent over $1 million just on the playground for children.
Awesome.
There is a lot of different artwork, including an amazing piece by an artist by the name of Janet Eckelman called Bending Arc, which is really in the center of the Pier District. There are 4 different restaurant places that you can go eat. There's a splash pad. There's actually a beach area. There had always been one, but we enlarged it, cleaned it up, and now it's actually usable. We created areas where there's a lot of natural, Florida-friendly plants and trees called that you can walk through, the coastal thicket, it's called. And it's actually built out over water. So here's this area that looks like you're standing in the middle, of a park, and it's out over water. And then ultimately, when you do get to the end of the building, and before you even get there, there's the Tampa Bay Watch Marine Exploration Center, where you can learn about the environment. When you get to the end, there's a couple amazing restaurants. There is a little sundry shop, and there's a fishing pier, because you can't be in Florida and on the water and not go fishing. And so there's really something for all ages, and all demographics, and in all socioeconomic statuses, which was the other thing that was important, is we wanted the pier to be accessible to anyone, whether they were, struggling financially, or they were wealthy. It shouldn't matter. You should still be able to go there and enjoy yourself with your family.
That's excellent. Yeah, and I can hear it too in the description of the pier. There's so many activities that you can do without spending money, and
Absolutely.
that's a huge.
And that was really important to the public. We heard that loud and clear.
That's great. Okay, great. And so we'll come back and dig into some of the tactical considerations around the communication and how you got that input. Before we do that, Mayor Buckhorn, could you tell us a little bit about the stakeholders, again, who you consider to be the constituency in the park development?
Sure, Liz. And for the record, Mayor Kriseman was fabulously successful building that award-winning pier, and it has transformed his downtown, just as the Riverwalk has for ours. It's a spectacular project, and I love going over there, in spite of the fact that I end up at the dermatologist's office the next day, given my fair Irish skin in this Florida heat. But
I can relate.
yeah, similar dynamics. This park that we are talking about now was not cheap. It was about $35 million at the end of the day. It was the most significant investment the city had ever made in that part of our downtown. And it was important for me, but more importantly, it was important for the community that people felt like they had ownership of this. The Riverwalk was on the east side in the downtown core, and that had already literally just exploded in popularity. And the west side had been neglected for even longer than the east side. And so I knew that our first foray into the west side, as we tried to make that river the center of everything we did, had to be done with delicacy. It had to be done with a respect for the history of those neighborhoods. It had to be done knowing that many of the neighbors there did not necessarily trust government, did not believe that government was going to do the right thing for them because they had been neglected for so long. They assumed that when we did this park, that it was nothing more than means to push them out of the neighborhood to make way for other people. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted that park to be the anchor for that neighborhood. And yes, there would be, as it turned out, hundreds of millions of dollars investment around that park as a result of the completion of the park. But I knew that that park needed to reflect the hopes and the aspirations of the people that live there and that could walk to it and that had gone to that park for generations. And so for me, it was important that we heard everybody and that we touched everybody in this process. We didn't always necessarily agree with what they had to say, but it was important that they had the opportunity to say it. And so we did it in a more traditional way than what IndyGov allows people to do now. A lot of it was door to door, hanging door hangers, using email and text messages to get people to public meetings where we could listen to them and hear their stories. The consultants that we had on this did a very, very good job of outreach in the community. They did that process before they put a pencil to paper, because it was important that this park be a living, breathing reflection of the people that lived nearby and paid homage to them and to their struggles. That the artwork in the park reflected the history of the park, history of our Black and brown neighborhoods, history of the cigar workers that had grown up in those neighborhoods when Tampa was the cigar capital of the world. It was a park that needed to provide for those young single moms, perhaps living in public housing without air conditioning, a place where the water parks could give their kids an opportunity in these Florida summers to come and cool off. and to be around other children. It needed to be Tampa's front lawn. And just as Rick talked about how that pier needed to be everybody's front lawn, this needed to be hallowed ground where families could come together. They could come safely. They could come freely. They could come to a place where those memories are going to be made. And so it was a 2-year process for us. And we really tried to be diligent about making sure all those voices were heard. There were some that will never agree with you, and that's okay. But at least they had the opportunity to voice their opinions and to vent whatever it is that they wanted to vent about.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's a good distinction. You're focused on getting as much information, as much input and feedback. It doesn't necessarily mean that you take all of it. But one of the things that I did really appreciate in talking to you both about these projects is in both cases, it feels like it's much more than a matter of keeping people informed. You really did take that information and that input and incorporate it into the way that those projects unfolded and what you prioritize. So, that was something that really resonated with me.
Well, listen, it can't be a monologue. It's got to be a conversation.
That's right.
And any tools that can help you as a policymaker engage in that conversation and get that feedback and interact with people who care enough to weigh in will make for a better product at the end of the day. And it's not an easy process, and it's complicated, and sometimes it's sticky. But the more people are heard, the better they will feel about that, and they will take ownership of that as if it were theirs and not just some public works project. That is particularly true for urban green spaces that are so limited anyway, particularly in large cities. People need to feel ownership of it, and they need to take ownership of it, and they need to feel like they're a part of it, and that their hard work and blood, sweat, and tears are somehow built into that green space or that piece of art or that public facility in these facilities. But you never know that unless you're able to talk to them.
Yeah, and following up on what Bob was just saying, I mean, the reality is there's, as he mentioned, there's always going to be those who aren't going to agree with you or like what you've done. And certainly, I'm sure any of the folks who are on this webinar who are in local government, they've heard this before. Well, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me, right? Because it doesn't matter how much outreach you do, someone's always going to say, well, I just didn't know. But what's important is when you're able to show, well, I'm sorry that you didn't hear that, but we had 50 meetings and we did this, or we sent this out and this out. It kind of makes it tough for their voice to resonate with the rest of the community. And so, yeah, you're doing it for a lot of reasons. Most importantly, is you want that feedback from the community so you get the buy-in. But, you also want to be able to say to those who say, well, I didn't know, you didn't tell me, why didn't you get the word out? Yeah, we did. Here's what we did. These are all the different things that we did to try and communicate with you. I'm sorry if you missed it, but we certainly wanted to make sure we gave you that chance.
Absolutely. And you both talked about certain tactics that you used. You talked about having a lot of meetings. You talked about door knocking, door tags. How did you, I think that everyone has also experienced the situation of very loud voices, loud and persistent voices that, might drown out other perspectives. How did you make sure that you were kind of casting a wide net and pulling people into the conversation and not only giving a forum to folks who might have had the loudest voice?
Well, rarely, Liz, are the loudest voices the most reflective of the community.
Mm-hmm.
They just tend to be the loudest voices. And I want to hear from the quiet voices. I want to hear from, the senior citizen that may not be able to get to the meeting. But if I had a tool by which I could get to them and ask their opinion, generally they're going to be forthcoming. People like to be asked, and they like to be involved, and they like to be consulted. And so whether it was going door to door with surveys, with, live bodies, live city employees, I didn't always assume that the folks that showed up for the meetings necessarily reflected the majority of the opinions of the people that lived in the neighborhood. As we all know, people that tend to make a living showing up at meetings oftentimes only speak for themselves. I want to hear from those other voices. And again, having tools to be able to do that really makes my job as a mayor much easier. It makes my staff's jobs easier. And most importantly, it makes the project better.
So, and I totally agree with everything Bob just said. I will say one of the things that we did is we knew that first off, you always get the loud voices that show up at the meetings, and oftentimes the people who you want to hear from don't show because for whatever reason, sometimes they're just not comfortable being in that environment, or they're afraid they're not going to get heard. And so you have to figure out, how do I reach them? And you also have to recognize that not everybody has access to technology. So obviously we use technology to the greatest extent we were able to back then. And obviously with things like IndiGov, it's a lot better now. But back then we had online surveys and opportunities for folks to go to a website and register their feelings and their desires and opinions on what they wanted. And then once we started getting into the design phase, which design they liked. But we also went into community centers and libraries, which is, places that a lot of the community does go, and made those same tools available to them there. So if they didn't have access to broadband and internet at home, they could go to a library and go online, or they could fill out a survey that was, in written form there at the community center or at the library. So everything that we could try and figure out is to be able to get those voices that you don't always hear, but are equally, if not more important, we wanted to try and do. And I think we did a pretty good job.
Great. Is there anything for either of you in reflection? Is there anything that you would have done differently in the spirit of other people who might be in the audience who are embarking on big projects?
Yeah.
I think, looking back, you always recognize that you did the best you could with the information you had at that moment. That's, the benefit of hindsight is not a luxury that those of us in public life get to engage in when you're in the midst of doing something like that. Yeah, there are probably things that I could have done better, should have done better. But at the end of the day, the park that we built turned out to be exactly what I hoped it would be. Was transformative for that neighborhood. Literally, as you heard me say earlier, it has resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of private capital being developed around this park. It has transformed the life of the people that live in this neighborhood, which was long overdue. And so I think it turned out to be a huge success. But yeah, when you're in the midst of it, you see the little things that no one else sees. That if you had the opportunity to go back, you might do something differently, or say it differently, or approach it differently. But I don't have time, nor do I have the luxury of looking back. When you're a mayor, it's you're full speed ahead. Let's just get it done.
So I'll give one example, and I think it goes to the point of as much as you think you're communicating, you can always do more. And so we had gotten to a point where we had our designs and the finalists, and we asked the public to do a non-binding vote on which design they like best. Now, the key was non-binding, and then the other part of it was because this was through the CCNA process, you cannot, pursuant to state law, you can't select a design based on the vote of the public. That can be one of the factors that you consider in making your final determination, but it can't be the deciding factor. We thought we had communicated that to the public, and we got thousands of votes. But the design that came in first ultimately was not the one selected by the committee. And there was a lot of people that, as much as we thought we communicated that to them, that this was non-binding and that wasn't going to be what made the final determination, there were those who said, you lied to us, we voted and you didn't count
Right.
our vote. It didn't matter. So, you know, I thought we did a great job. And obviously the pier has been incredibly successful. We've won international awards from ULI. And just to give you an example of how many residents use it, we budgeted for the first year for parking revenue, I think 600,000, and it did 2.2 million
Wow.
in just parking. So it's really well utilized, but that's the lesson I think that I would take away is, even when you think you've communicated enough, you can always do more.
Great. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, I can see how that's a very nuanced thing to have to communicate. And in line with some of the things that you've already said in this conversation, you still want that data, even if ultimately there have to be other factors for consideration. Similar to what Mayor Buckhorn said, like you would probably do the survey again because you want the data, even if you're not going to choose the first.
Absolutely.
So the one flag for the audience, we'll be taking questions soon. So if you have questions, please share them in the Q&A and I'll open up the floor in a bit. But before we do that, and it's in a similar vein, but what best practices or again, from all of your experience, be it these projects or be it, your overall experience as mayors, what guidance do you have? What best practices do you have with regard to communication, community engagement that you think others could benefit from?
For me, it was recognizing that there is a diversity of channels by which you can communicate now. The world has exploded in terms of where people get their information from now. And so you can't assume by putting a notice in the local newspaper that everyone's going to read it, because we've all seen the demise of the printed press, sadly. And people get their information from all kinds of places. And so as you enter into this relationship with the folks that you serve, recognize that the diversity of offerings have to be embraced by everybody in your operation, whether and whatever platform it may be, whether it's, and Rick and I aren't going to do this, but, us doing a TikTok or, Rick in a bathing suit on Instagram. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that you can communicate. Both of us have teenagers, so we're familiar with this. And you got to take advantage of every one of them. And more is better. More frequency is better. More diversity is better. And so don't just assume that everyone reads the newspapers or everyone watches the local news. You've got to go where they get their information, and they're getting their information from a dozen different sources. And you got to be present there, and you've got to be persuasive there, and you've got to be informative in all of those different categories.
Yeah, I think that, one of the challenges that I've, especially in some ways since I've left government, and I was between council and the state house and mayor 22 years in government, is status quo, status quo, status quo. You have to break free of the status quo. Because you've done it a certain way all the time doesn't mean that's the way you should still do it. You have to embrace innovation. You have to embrace technology. Bob and I have both already made this comment once, and we'll probably make it several times before we're done with this webinar. The technology that's available, like IndiGov today, that we didn't have, we're jealous of everyone that's serving right now, because you have access to technology that allows you to break free from the status quo and communicate with your constituents in ways that we never had the ability to do. And far more efficient and effective ways than we were able to do. And if you're not taking advantage of those, you're making a huge mistake. It is a big miss, because every project you're working on, no matter how small or how big, will be better when you've gotten the input from your constituents and you've heard it and you've given them the chance to weigh in and they feel like they had a real chance to express themselves on that issue. And so if you're not taking advantage of all the different mediums that are available to you and the technologies and the innovations, you're making a big mistake and you're missing out.
Rick, you can imagine, and Rick and I talk about this all the time, a major public works project. And we all know how disruptive those are in the lives of the people that we serve. You're tearing up an interstate, you're tearing up a street, you're laying sewer lines, you're putting water pipes down, and you're affecting a 10 square block geographic radius. Just imagine if you could geofence that 10 block area and you had data on all of the people that live there in terms of their email addresses, phone numbers, and you could notify them every step of the way the status of that project, where the delays are, what the completion dates, the start dates, what to expect with the construction taking place, and keep them advised throughout the process as to what to expect and the impact on their life, both good and bad. Just imagine how beneficial that would be for the people that live there and are living with that construction every day, and for the policymakers that now know that they are keeping their constituents advised and they have made them a part of the solution, not just ignoring them and telling them it's going to start here and maybe it will finish somewhere down the road. And in between, we don't know or we don't care what happens to you. It's those kinds of tools that can make you look a lot better, make your staff work a lot smarter, and get buy-in from the people that you serve in terms of recognizing what exactly is going on in their neighborhood.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the time savings, Bob's absolutely right. The time savings for your staff of not having to respond to the constant inflow of people that are upset because they don't know what's going on.
Right.
It takes them away from doing the actual work to get the project done or whatever else they're working on.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that we talk about as a company, as we serve our clients, as we build out our product, is and you guys alluded to this, but the means of your constituents communicating with you have exploded. They can reach you via so many different channels, and we're working to provide the tools such that elected officials, city agencies have the same level of, modern technology in order to handle, triage those type of requests, whether they're coming from social media, whether they're coming from email, whether they're coming from phone calls. Because to your point, while digital is pervasive and the volume is enormous, there are also those who prefer to communicate by call. There are those who will show up in person to a meeting. So part of the solution in our eyes is being able to centralize that information and also create a feedback loop so that you're able to then follow up with those people based on their specific need or interest. So we did get one question from the audience, which says, Mayor Buckhorn, what best practices would you suggest for addressing concerns from communities of color when approaching a project like the park?
Great question. And particularly in rapidly growing urban areas, it is increasingly a challenge as downtowns continue to blossom, which obviously impacts the neighborhoods around them, which historically have been underserved or communities of color. There is a suspicion out there in many of these communities about government, and rightfully so, given sort of the history of what has occurred in some of these neighborhoods. And so you have to approach it with empathy, with a recognition that there's a lot of folks there that don't trust you and don't trust government and don't necessarily think that government is going to do right by them because historically they have not. Whether it's building an interstate through an African-American neighborhood, therefore dividing that neighborhood in the pretext of urban renewal, to any number of things. So I think you go in with respect, you go in with listening with your ears first before you talk with your mouth. I think you go in understanding and being sympathetic and empathetic and responsive to the history of these neighborhoods and the lived experience of the people that have gone through this. And I think you just try and find common ground. Now, progress can be painful. It's disruptive. It's challenging, and oftentimes in many of these communities upends 3 or 4 generations with some degree of uncertainty, if you will, which is disconcerting, particularly for senior citizens. And so I think you have to approach it from a different perspective. It's not like going out and building in the suburbs where you're taking pasture land and putting up a subdivision. The cows are the only people that are getting moved there. When you're talking about cities and urban environments, given the history of that development, I think you have to do it very carefully, strategically, empathetically, and purposefully go about doing this. And that's why the communication is so much more important in those challenges than it is in typical suburban development.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was very thoughtful. We have a couple more questions. On big projects like your examples, how much engagement should we give up to consultants to do versus having council elected officials rolling up our sleeves, hitting the pavement, attending meetings? It feels really easy to have consultants do it, but also feels like the real trust and support from constituents will be built when we show up. So I think that would be for either of you.
Yeah, you got to show up. Elected officials have to show up. I mean, consultants are great from the standpoint of, the time it takes and the organization necessary to put the meetings together. But if the public doesn't see the elected officials at those meetings, then they're not going to believe that the elected officials are ever going to truly get the information. And it's not the same, even if they get the information, as it is if somebody is looking you right in the eye and having that conversation about what they care about on that project. So I think it's a huge miss if you just turn it over to consultants and let them do their thing and no elected officials ever show up for the meetings.
Couldn't agree more, particularly on huge projects like Rick and I have talked about. People need to trust you, and they need to know that you have skin in the game, and they need to hear it from you and look you in the eyes and understand that you are doing this for the right reasons and what you think is in the best interest of this community. Because ultimately the consultants don't live in your city generally. You do. And that relationship, particularly in a strong mayor form of government, that relationship between the people that we represent and the mayor is a much more intimate personal relationship than it is in any other job across the political spectrum. And so you want to invest your political capital in it, if it's something that you believe in, and there is risk, certainly. I liken it to walking a tightrope without a net, and you can't afford to fail. But I think putting your personal credibility on the line, showing up, being present, being thoughtful, listening before you speak, making sure they have an opportunity to vent or to share or to give you in whatever language they may speak or however they may speak it, their hopes and aspirations, and you absorb that into your policy making. It makes for a better city, you for a better elected official, and the citizens to be a more happy and supportive group.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time to just take a couple more. I'll take them in the order that they came in, and then we'll make sure that everyone is able to go about their day on time. The next one is, did you leverage media connections to help spread the word? What role did the media play, if any?
It's huge. It gives you the platform to tell your story. I mean, you may think you talk to, everybody that needs to be talked to, but the media gives you that platform. It gives you that pulpit to be able to go preach the gospel of whatever story it is that you're telling, whatever narrative it is that you're trying to drive. You can tell the story as to how this project is going to impact neighborhood X, Y, and Z and what the long-term benefits are. So the media, obviously, they're not cheerleaders for what you're doing, but they certainly can be conduits to you being able to get the information out there as best you can. But it's also important that you want to get the information out unfiltered, which is why these other channels, if you will, and other technologies are equally as important.
Yep.
Because then you can tell the unfiltered, unfettered story of exactly what it is that you're doing. And you can do it in a way that isn't filtered by, whatever media biases are out there. They're not going to give you much time to tell the story. And these are complex projects. These are big projects. They're expensive projects. They need to be told in their entirety, and you're not going to be able to do that in 30 seconds on a local news station.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. We have these workshop meetings, for example, and certainly you want the media to cover those and to come to those as often as you can get them to come there. Those workshops could last an hour to 2 hours. The story that's going to air is going to be 30 seconds to a minute. And so as Bob was just saying, it's going to be way too filtered. They're not going to get the complete picture. But having said that, you still use every method available to you to get the word out, because even if they don't fully cover it and they only cover a snippet of it, the hope is that that'll raise the issue in somebody's mind that hadn't been even thinking about that. And then next time you do have a workshop, maybe they'll come out.
Great. And just two more. I think this next one is something a lot of people would be interested in. As we explore new digital tools, we struggle with privacy and managing concerns about how we use data. Maintain information about constituents, keep them informed, but not to watchdog. Any recommendations on how to address that community concern?
Well, I mean, if anybody thinks that their information is not widely available everywhere, they're kidding themselves. I mean, obviously, you got to be cognizant of number one, those concerns, and two, how you use the data. But that data is readily available to any consumer company. And so that should not be a surprise to anybody. I would look at that data as a tool to help you be more effective, be more efficient, to understand your constituents and understand your audience better, and to use the tools that are available to you that are all publicly and readily available to help you do your job better. It's no different than, running a company, no different than knowing that your consumer is. Those voters, the more you know about them, the more effective you will be and the better you will be able to communicate with them.
Yeah, I don't know that I can add a whole lot to what Bob just said. I think he hit it right on the head. So I'll save the time for the next question.
Okay, great. And this will be our final question. What were constituent expectations like when you entered office? How did that change by the time you left? And how do you see it evolving going forward?
So this is a fun one for me because when I first came into office, there wasn't social media. And so the expectations were very different. How we communicated with each other was very different. It is in today's world with all the different methods that there are of communications. I think the expectations are so much greater because of that, because there's really no excuse now for not giving your constituents an opportunity to be heard. And likewise responding to them. And that's a big one. That's one of the things that I love about this platform, the Indigo platform, is the ability to really track everything that's coming into you and be able to respond efficiently, because that's in some ways the biggest challenge I think for all of us as either elected officials or city staffers is there's so many methods of communicating that are coming into you from so many different sources. How do you stay on top of that? Because the expectations, I think, have just gotten so much higher that you're going to hear us and you're going to respond to us. And so if there's tools out there to help you be more efficient and better at responding and staying on top of the communications that are coming in and getting them back out, if you're not using those tools, you're making a huge mistake. Because the expectations are not going to decrease. They're just going to continue to increase.
Rick's exactly right. And at the macro level for my city, 2011, when I took office, we were in the worst recession since the Great Depression. Tampa had been knocked flat. We were a city that literally had no hope and very little future. 8 years later, we are one of the fastest growing communities in the country and one of the hottest real estate markets in the country. And it was because people believed in that narrative and believed in the message that things were going to get better if we were stuck together. Part of that was being able to communicate that and drive that narrative over and over and over again. But if you're not taking advantage of tools that are available to you, shame on you, because your job will be so much easier. You will be so much more effective. Your staff will be better, and the people that pay your salary, that hire you, will be better served. And so for me, and I know for Rick, it's an exciting time for cities. Go take advantage of every tool that you have that we didn't have, and go make your city proud.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. You both have a wealth of knowledge and experience. I know that we didn't even scratch the surface, but I certainly got a lot of value from the conversation, and really, really appreciate you two joining us, and also all of our audience members for taking time out of their day. It means a lot, and we're very grateful for your time and attention, and hope that you got a lot of valuable tips. I know that I did. And we look forward to the TikTok video.
Not me. He'll do it.
Yeah.
I need my teenage daughter to help me though.
Yeah. I don't think so. Thank you all so much.
All right, great. Thanks so much. Have a great day.